dust and canvas. The scent of sawdust, pine, and linseed oil was Elias Fisher's second skin. In his father's carpentry shop, the rhythmic scrape of a handplane against a plank of maple was a lullaby he'd known since childhood. Today, however, the familiar sounds and smells couldn't quite lull the unfamiliar stirrings within him. He sanded a cabinet door, his calloused thumb tracing the grain, but his mind drifted beyond the carefully measured angles and smooth finishes. A restlessness, subtle yet persistent, had begun to hum beneath the surface of his quiet life, a dissonant note in the harmonious melody of his faith and family. He'd heard whispers from the edge of their community, talk of a new Englishwoman who had bought the old Miller place, just a few miles down the road where the asphalt met their gravel lanes. An artist, they said, who painted vivid pictures. Elias had dismissed it as idle gossip, yet the image of bright colors, so different from the muted tones of his world, occasionally snagged at his imagination. Meanwhile, Sarah Jenkins wrestled with a lug nut that seemed fused to her tire rim. Sweat beaded on her forehead, plastering strands of auburn hair to her temples. "Come on, you stubborn piece of metal," she muttered, grunting with effort. The wrench slipped, barking her knuckles. She swore under her breath, a colorful expletive that felt satisfyingly rebellious in the quiet rural air. The flat tire was an annoying interruption to her morning, a jarring reminder that country living, while idyllic for inspiration, sometimes lacked the convenient roadside assistance she'd grown accustomed to in the city. She glared at the uncooperative tire, then at the vast expanse of cornfields stretching to the horizon, dotted with quaint farmhouses and horse-drawn buggies. She'd moved here seeking peace and a new perspective for her art, not a wrestling match with a rusty tire. Elias, guiding his buggy down the dusty road, spotted the maroon sedan pulled to the shoulder. He usually kept his gaze fixed ahead, respecting the unspoken boundary between their worlds. But the sight of a lone figure struggling, shoulders slumped in frustration, caught his eye. It was the Englishwoman, he realized, her bright floral scarf a splash of unexpected color against the muted roadside. His first instinct was to continue, to remain unseen, to uphold the clear division. But a stronger, almost rebellious impulse tugged at him. He slowed the mare, his internal debate a silent tumult. His duty was clear: avoid worldly entanglement. Yet the simple act of a fellow human needing help, it gnawed at him. He pulled the reins gently, turning the buggy towards her. Sarah, leaning against the tire, heard the clip-clop of hooves approaching. She straightened, pushing a stray curl from her eyes. A buggy, she thought, then saw the young man at the reins. He wore a straw hat and simple, dark clothing, his beard neatly trimmed. His gaze, though hesitant, was direct. Elias stopped the buggy a respectful distance away. "Having trouble?" he asked, his voice a low rumble, surprisingly gentle. Sarah felt a flush creep up her neck. Her hands were grimy, her face probably streaked with dirt. "Just a little," she managed, forcing a small smile. "This lug nut seems to be stuck." Elias dismounted, his movements economical and strong. He walked towards her, his gaze briefly sweeping over the car, then settling on the tire. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the wrench in her hand. Sarah hesitated, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. It wasn't just the offer. It was the quiet confidence in his posture, the genuine concern in his dark eyes. "Oh, yes, please." She handed him the wrench, her fingers brushing his calloused palm for a fleeting second. A spark, unexpected and electric, seemed to jump between them. Elias quickly withdrew his hand, his expression unreadable. He knelt, his broad shoulders momentarily blocking the sun. He applied the wrench, his muscles straining, a vein throbbing in his forearm. With a final powerful heave, the lug nut finally gave way with a protesting squeal. Sarah watched, fascinated by his quiet determination, by the sheer competence radiating from him. He worked quickly, efficiently, changing the tire with an ease she hadn't possessed. "There," he said, rising and dusting off his hands. "Should hold you." "Thank you," Sarah said, genuinely relieved. I really appreciate it. I don't think I would have gotten that off." She extended her hand. "I'm Sarah. Sarah Jenkins." Elias hesitated for only a fraction of a second, then took her hand. His grip was firm, warm. "Elias Fisher," he replied, his gaze meeting hers. His eyes, she noticed, were a deep, intense blue, holding a depth she hadn't expected. In that brief touch, that shared glance, a connection, fragile yet undeniable, formed between them, a silent whisper of something forbidden in the dust of the road and the canvas of their separate lives. He released her hand and quickly stepped back, the invisible boundary reasserting itself. "I must go," he said, his voice a little more clipped now, the internal conflict once again visible in his tightened jaw. He nodded a quick farewell, then turned, climbed back into his buggy, and urged the mare forward, leaving Sarah standing by her car, the scent of fresh-cut hay and the echo of his name lingering in the air. Whispers in the wheat. The scent of freshly sawn pine usually brought Elias a quiet contentment, a familiar anchor in his predictable world. But today, as he planed a smooth oak plank in his family's workshop, the aroma was tainted by something else. A faint, lingering memory of citrus and paint. Sarah. Her voice, a melodic lilt against the rumble of the passing buggy, replayed in his mind. Her hands, surprisingly strong as she'd pointed towards the jack. Her eyes, a startling shade of green that had held his gaze for a beat too long. He chastised himself, the sharp stroke of the plane a physical manifestation of his self-reprimand. Such thoughts were not for him, not for a man dedicated to God and community. Yet, like a stubborn burr under his skin, the image of her remained. The ease with which she'd laughed, despite the inconvenience of a flat tire, was a stark contrast to the quiet solemnity he was accustomed to. It was unsettling, this unfamiliar pull, like a compass needle spinning wildly. He found himself glancing towards the road, half expecting, half dreading, to see her brightly coloured vehicle pass by again. Sarah, meanwhile, was experiencing a novel restlessness. The rolling hills and fields that had initially promised serenity now seemed to hum with an unexpected energy, all centered around the enigmatic Elias. He was a painting waiting to be captured, a study in quiet strength and ancient traditions. The memory of his hands, calloused and capable, tightening the lug nuts, sent a curious warmth through her. She'd always found inspiration in the wild and untamed, but Elias, with his disciplined life, offered a different kind of mystery. A week later, armed with her sketchbook and an almost compulsive need for new perspectives, Sarah found herself wandering the perimeter of Elias's family farm. She rationalized it as an exploration of local architecture, the stark lines of the barns and the orderly rows of crops. Her easel was conspicuously absent, replaced by a small leather-bound notebook and a charcoal stick. She knew, with a thrill she tried to dismiss as artistic curiosity, that the lane leading to their fields bordered her property. The sun was dipping, painting the sky in hues of orange and rose, when she spotted him. Elias was mending a section of fence, his broad back to her, his movements efficient and practiced. Her heart gave a little jolt. This was it. Her chance. She approached slowly, feigning absorption in her sketchpad, though her eyes were fixed on his retreating figure. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice a little breathy. "I hope I'm not trespassing." Elias straightened, turning slowly. The setting sun caught the gold flecks in his eyes, making them momentarily incandescent. He was wearing a straw hat, shading his face, but she could still discern the faint flush that rose to his cheeks. "No," he said, his voice deeper than she remembered. "This is the edge of our land." Sarah offered a small, hesitant smile. "I'm just admiring the view." The way the light catches the wheat this time of day is truly remarkable. She gestured vaguely towards the swaying golden stalks. It's like liquid gold. He looked at the wheat, then back at her, a flicker of something unreadable in his gaze. It will be harvested soon, he stated, his words clipped. I'm Sarah, by the way, she offered, extending a hand before remembering the cultural divide. She quickly withdrew it, feeling a blush of her own. Again. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. I remember. His eyes lingered on her face, then dropped to her sketchbook. You draw? Yes, she confirmed, feeling a surge of nervous energy. It's what I do. I'm an artist. I've just moved into the old Miller place. I know the house, he replied, his gaze drifting towards her property. It was empty for a long time. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the rustling of the wheat and the distant caw of a crow. It was an awkward silence, yet it hummed with an unspoken current. It must be hard work, maintaining all this, Sarah ventured, gesturing to the expanse of fields. Elias nodded. It is our life, our way. It's beautiful, she said genuinely. A different kind of beauty than I'm used to, but beautiful nonetheless. She met his gaze directly. And you fixed my tire so quickly. Thank you again. He merely nodded, but his eyes held hers for a fraction longer than strictly necessary. Got be with you, he finally said, a customary dismissal. And with you, Elias, she replied, her voice soft. As he turned back to the fence, Sarah watched him go, a shiver tracing its way down her spine. The whispers in the wheat seemed to carry more than just the evening breeze. They carried a secret, a nascent connection, dangerous and thrilling, that had just taken root. The secret grove. The excuse had been flimsy, something about a stubborn fence post needing extra reinforcement before tomorrow's rain. Elias had muttered it to his father with averted eyes, the lie tasting like ash on his tongue. Guilt gnawed at him, a tiny, insistent worm, but it was overshadowed by a thrumming anticipation that vibrated through his very bones. He'd never felt this alive, this reckless. Slinging a worn hammer and a coil of wire over his shoulder, he'd melted into the deepening twilight, his boots crunching on the gravel road leading away from the familiar farm. The air grew cooler, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant wood smoke. He walked faster than necessary, his breath misting in the crisp evening. Each shadow seemed to hold a watchful eye, each rustle in the undergrowth a potential witness. He chastised himself for the paranoia, yet the thrill of transgression hummed beneath his skin. This wasn't just a meeting. It was an act of defiance, a quiet rebellion against the well-worn path laid out for him since birth. Sarah was already there, a silhouette against the fading bruise purple of the sky. She stood near the gnarled roots of an ancient oak, a sentinel guarding the entrance to what locals called the Whispering Grove. A forgotten copse of trees bordering an old crumbling stone wall, barely visible from the main road. The spot he'd suggested, a place known only to a handful of children who dared to explore its overgrown paths. Her back was to him, her posture a mixture of apprehension and resolve. He cleared his throat, a small sound that seemed to shatter the profound quiet. She spun, her eyes wide. Then a smile bloomed, a beacon in the dim light. Elias, she breathed, her voice a soft caress on the evening air. Sarah, he responded, the name feeling both foreign and intimately familiar on his tongue. He dropped his tools by the wall, the clatter jarring. They stood for a moment, an invisible current flowing between them. The initial awkwardness quickly dissolved into something more potent, a shared current of nervous excitement. He noticed the way her hair caught the last vestiges of light, a fiery halo around her delicate features. She wore a simple dress, but on her it seemed to flow with an effortless grace. I didn't think you'd come, she admitted, stepping closer. The scent of lavender and something uniquely her own, like paint and sunshine, enveloped him. "I said I would," he replied, his voice rougher than he intended. "I needed to." They walked deeper into the grove, the trees closing in, creating a private sanctuary. The ground was soft with fallen leaves, muffling their footsteps. They found a moss-covered boulder, perfectly positioned for conversation. As they settled, the moon, a sliver of silver, began its slow ascent, casting dappled patterns through the canopy. They talked about everything and nothing. Sarah spoke of her life in England, the buzzing energy of cities, the pursuit of art, and the quiet yearning that had led her to this secluded corner of the world. Elias, in turn, found himself sharing snippets of his own existence he'd never articulated to anyone outside his community. The satisfying weight of wood in his hands, the rhythm of the seasons on the farm, the unspoken expectations that shaped his days. He spoke of his younger brother, Samuel, and his sister, Rebecca, their shared chores, the hymns sung in unison. With each word, the invisible walls between them seemed to crumble. Sarah listened with an intensity that made him feel truly seen, truly heard. Her questions were gentle, curious, never judgmental. He found himself mesmerized by the way her eyes sparkled when she laughed, a sound like wind chimes. It's so different," she mused, gazing up at the interwoven branches. "This world, your world, and yours is freedom," he said, the word a tangible thing in the air between them. He thought of her stories of traveling, of choosing her own path. A comfortable silence settled, punctuated by the chirping of crickets and the distant hoot of an owl. Elias felt a profound sense of peace, yet an underlying tremor of urgency. This was fleeting, dangerous. "I shouldn't be here," he finally confessed, the words a raw whisper. Sarah reached out, her fingers brushing his arm. The touch was electric, sending a jolt through him that made his breath catch. "But you are," she said, her voice barely audible, "and I'm glad." Their eyes met, and in that shared glance, a silent promise was made. A realization that this connection, this burgeoning affection, was more than just curiosity. It was real, undeniable, and utterly reckless. The risks were immense, the consequences potentially devastating, but in the moonlit silence of the whispering grove, none of it mattered. Only the two of them, and the forbidden spark that had ignited between their disparate worlds. It was a secret, fragile and exhilarating, and they both knew, with a certainty that resonated deep within their souls, that it was only just beginning. A false sense of security. The scent of pine needles and damp earth became the perfume of their clandestine world. Weeks dissolved into a tapestry of stolen moments, each thread woven with increasing boldness. Elias found himself anticipating the clandestine encounters with a hunger that defied his years of disciplined living. He'd leave early for the market, citing a need to check on a timber delivery, only to divert to the old logging road where Sarah would be waiting, her worn canvas bag slung over her shoulder, a faint smudge of charcoal often gracing her cheek. Their conversations blossomed, moving from cautious disclosures to shared vulnerabilities. She spoke of her London art school days, of vibrant galleries and bohemian cafes, a world so far removed from his own that it felt like a fantastical tale. He, in turn, described the rhythm of the seasons on his family farm, the satisfying weight of a well-planned plank, the quiet pride in a perfectly mitered joint. They met by the whispering creek, the water's murmur masking their voices, and in the abandoned stone quarry, its sheer walls amplifying the intimacy of their hushed laughter. Sometimes, they simply sat, shoulders brushing, absorbing the quiet comfort of each other's presence, the unspoken understanding a potent language of its own. Elias, once meticulous in his routine, began to subtly reshape his days. A missing tool became an excuse to retrace his steps. A spontaneous decision to scout for new lumber provided a window of opportunity. His lies, at first clumsy and guilt-ridden, became more fluid, almost second nature. He learned to read the subtle nuances of his father's gaze, the questions in his mother's raised eyebrow, and preemptively offered explanations that sounded plausible, even mundane. The constant hum of apprehension was there, a low thrum beneath his ribs, but it was increasingly overshadowed by the intoxicating rush of their shared secret. He started carrying a small flat stone in his pocket, smooth and cool, a tactile reminder of the day Sarah had found it by the creek and handed it to him, a simple, profound gesture. One bustling afternoon, as a sudden rain shower drove them under the shelter of a thick oak, Sarah pulled out her sketchpad. "Hold still," she commanded, her eyes alight with a focus he hadn't seen before. He watched, fascinated, as her hand moved with swift, confident strokes, capturing the furrow of his brow, the slight curve of his lips as he tried to suppress a smile. He was used to seeing his reflection in the polished surface of a wooden plank or the still surface of a rain barrel, but this was different. This was him, seen through her eyes. Later, hidden away in her small cabin, amidst the vibrant chaos of her art supplies, Sarah worked on a larger canvas. It was Elias, but not merely a likeness. She imbued the portrait with the quiet strength she saw in him, the underlying tension of his dual life, the nascent longing in his gaze. It was a private testament, a piece of her soul poured onto linen, a secret tribute to their bond. She knew it could never be displayed, never openly admired, yet the act of creating it solidified their connection in her mind, making it feel more real, more permanent. As she painted, a faint tremor ran through the floorboards. She glanced towards the window, but saw only the familiar pattern of dappled sunlight through the leaves. It was probably just the old house settling, she thought, or perhaps a deer in the nearby woods. A fleeting, almost imperceptible shadow passed her window, gone before she could fully register it. Elias, meanwhile, had returned home, his heart still thrumming with the memory of Sarah's focused gaze. He was about to put his tools away when he noticed it. A faint, almost invisible smudge of charcoal on the cuff of his workshirt, just above the wrist. He scrubbed at it with his thumb, dismissing it as a casual oversight. A small, inconsequential detail, he thought, a testament to the closeness of their secret world, not a potential breach. The false sense of security had begun to weave its silken, treacherous net around them. Frayed edges. The cool, damp earth still clung to Elias's boots as he retraced his path from Sarah's cabin. He moved with a practiced quietness, a blend of Amish upbringing and the newfound stealth of a man keeping a secret. The moon, a sliver of silver, barely illuminated the winding lane. His mind replayed Sarah's soft laughter, the way her fingers had brushed his when he handed her the wrench. He felt a buoyant lightness, a dangerous joy that made him almost skip. Then he saw it. A flash of pale blue against the muted greens and browns of the undergrowth, just off the path where they'd last paused, hidden by a thicket of elderberries. He knelt, his heart thudding a sudden, discordant rhythm against his ribs. It was a bonnet ribbon, a delicate silk strip, undeniably Sarah's. She often wore ribbons woven into her hair, a departure from the simple bonnets of his own community. This one, however, felt different. It wasn't merely dropped, it seemed almost deliberately placed, visible enough to catch the eye, yet camouflaged enough to be overlooked by a casual passerby. A shiver, cold and sharp, traced its way down his spine. He snatched it up, folding it tightly in his palm, the silk feeling oddly incriminating. Had someone seen it fall? Or worse, had someone found it and placed it there? A silent, unsettling message. The path home, which moments before had felt exhilarating, now felt like a gauntlet. Hours later, the sun already dipping below the horizon, Sarah pulled her car onto the narrow gravel path leading to her cottage. The repaired tire hummed steadily, a small victory in her day. She'd spent a blissful afternoon sketching, the scent of pine and damp earth filling her lungs. Elias's presence a warm afterglow in her memory. As she slowed, her gaze drifted to the edge of her property. An Amish buggy, Martha Stoltzfus's familiar black carriage, was drawn up beside the road, further down from her own car. Martha herself sat rigidly on the driver's seat, her back straight, her bonnet a white beacon against the gathering dusk. She wasn't moving, wasn't talking to anyone, just watching. Sarah's breath caught. Martha's gaze, usually benign, felt acutely focused, not on Sarah directly, but on her car, the newly fitted tire, the subtle dust stirred up by her arrival. It lingered for what felt like an eternity, a beat too long, before Martha finally clucked to her horse and moved on. The silence Martha left behind was heavy, charged with unspoken questions. Sarah gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. Had Martha been there long? Had she seen Elias leave earlier? The quiet peace of her secluded home suddenly felt porous, vulnerable. That evening, as Elias slipped through the back door of his family's farmhouse, the scent of simmering stew and beeswax filled the air. His mother, Leah, was at the dry sink, scrubbing a pot with methodical strokes. She turned as he entered, her gaze softening. "Elias," she said, her voice gentle. "You're home a bit late again tonight." She dried her hands on her apron, not accusatory, merely stating a fact. "The chores are done, but your father was asking." Elias mumbled a quick apology about needing to check on a loose fence post further down the lane. It was a half-truth, just enough to satisfy without raising suspicion. His mother nodded, her expression unreadable. She wasn't questioning his honesty. It was the frequency of these late returns that subtly permeated the air. It wasn't a rebuke, but a quiet observation that settled in the pit of Elias's stomach, a dull ache of guilt. The world outside his community, once a thrilling escape, now felt like a net tightening around him, its threads woven from stray ribbons, lingering gazes, and the gentle knowing remarks of those he loved. The edges of his secret, once so tightly bound, were beginning to fray. The weight of deception. The scent of beeswax and worn hymn books filled the meeting house, usually a comfort, now a suffocating shroud. Elias knelt. The rough plank beneath his knees, a physical manifestation of his spiritual discomfort. The cadence of the deacon's prayer, familiar and unwavering, seemed to mock him. "O Lord, guide us in the path of righteousness. Protect us from worldly temptations." Each word was a fresh arrow, piercing the fragile shield of his self-deception. His mind, instead of settling on salvation, replayed Sarah's laugh, the brush of her fingers against his when he'd handed her the lug wrench, the vibrant splash of paint on her smock. He saw the subtle curve of her smile, felt the phantom warmth of her hand in his, and a wave of nausea washed over him. He was a hypocrite, a wolf in sheep's clothing, kneeling among his brothers, while his heart pulsed with a forbidden rhythm, the weight of his secret pressed down, crushing the air from his lungs. He struggled for breath, convinced that the elders could see the lie etched on his brow, that the very air vibrated with his deceit. When the prayer concluded, he rose, his legs stiff, his gaze fixed on the floor, unable to meet the eyes of his community. Miles away, the late afternoon sun streamed through Sarah's studio window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the golden light. She leaned against her easel, a half-finished landscape forgotten. "It's getting harder, Chloe," she confessed, her voice tight with a tension that was becoming all too familiar. Her friend, Chloe, sat on a paint-splattered stool, sipping tea. "The sneaking around, the constant looking over my shoulder. It's exhausting, and the thought of what could happen if anyone found out." Sarah trailed off, a shiver tracing its way down her spine despite the warmth of the room. She picked up a small, smooth stone from her windowsill, turning it over and over in her fingers. "I keep telling myself it's worth it, that he's worth it. But the fear, it's like a constant dull ache now. not just a fleeting worry. Chloe nodded slowly, her expression sympathetic. You're walking a tightrope, Sarah. It's natural to feel that way. But you have to decide if the view from up there is truly worth the fall. Sarah stared out the window, her gaze settling on the distant fields, where the dark silhouettes of Amish buggies were just visible. The chasm between her world and Elias's felt wider than ever. The following Sunday, as the community gathered after meeting, Martha Stoltzfus, her face a network of fine wrinkles, observed Elias. He stood a little apart from the other young men, his usual boisterous laughter absent, replaced by a quiet, almost melancholic reserve. His eyes, once clear and direct, now held a haunted, faraway look, darting nervously when someone addressed him. He picked at a loose thread on his waistcoat, a gesture of unease Martha had never seen in him. She had noticed the slight tremor in his hands when he passed the bread, the unusual pallor beneath his tan. And the car by Sarah Jenkins's cottage the other day. A flicker of suspicion sparked in Martha's keen eyes. Later, as Elias helped his father hitch the horse to their buggy, he felt Martha's gaze on him again. It was not overtly hostile, but it carried an unsettling weight, a silent question that pricked at his conscience. She offered a brief, almost imperceptible nod, her lips pressed into a thin line. It was a gesture that spoke volumes, a silent acknowledgement of something amiss. Elias's heart hammered against his ribs. He knew that look. He had seen it on his mother's face when one of the younger boys had misbehaved. It was the look of an elder who was beginning to piece together a puzzle Elias desperately wanted to keep hidden. The community, so interconnected, so attuned to every nuance, was starting to notice. The ground beneath his feet, once so firm, now felt dangerously thin. A telltale trinket. The crisp morning air bit at Elias's exposed hands as he hitched his mare, Bess, to the buggy. He'd helped Sarah with a flat tire late yesterday afternoon, a task that had left him feeling both exhilarated by their shared laughter and profoundly unsettled by the proximity of her worldly life. He'd been so focused on getting away before anyone saw him near her cottage, he'd barely registered tucking the small, colourful drawing Sarah had pressed into his hand into the buggy's storage compartment. It was a whimsical sketch of a bird, its wings outstretched, rendered in vibrant blues and yellows, colours rarely seen in his monochromatic world. He'd intended to move it to a safer, more private place, but the urgency of returning home had made him forget. Today, as he prepared for the morning run to the mill, his youngest niece, Leah, a wisp of a girl with bright, inquisitive eyes, toddled over to the buggy. Her tiny fingers, grubby from playing in the dirt, reached up towards the open compartment. "Pretty bird," she chirped, pointing a chubby finger directly at the corner of the drawing peeking out from beneath a blanket. Elias's heart seized in his chest. A jolt of pure panic shot through him, colder than the morning air. He snatched the drawing, crumpling it slightly as he thrust it deep into his trousers pocket. "Just a bit of paper, Leah May," he said, his voice a little too quick, a little too loud. He forced a smile, ruffling her sun-bleached hair. "Go tell Mama I'll be back before midday." Leah, easily distracted, skipped off, already forgetting the colourful scrap, but her mother, Anna, standing on the porch, had noticed the exchange. A faint line creased her brow as she watched Elias climb into the buggy, his movements unusually stiff. A bit of paper didn't usually warrant such a hurried, almost furtive gesture from Elias. She dismissed it as a fleeting thought, yet the image of her brother's strangely tense shoulders lingered. Later that afternoon, the rhythmic thrum of sewing machines filled Martha Stoltzfus's parlour. A quilting bee was in full swing, the air thick with the scent of freshly laundered cotton and the quiet murmur of conversation. Martha, her keen eyes missing nothing, knotted a thread, then leaned slightly towards Sarah Yoder, her neighbour. "Elias has been distracted of late," Martha began, her voice low, almost conversational, yet carrying the weight of unspoken observation. Saw him at the market last week. Almost walked right past Jacob Miller without a word. Not like our Elias. Sarah Yoder, a plump woman whose fingers flew across the fabric, paused her stitching. I noticed that too. And Anna mentioned he seemed a mite edgy this morning. Something about a piece of paper in his buggy. She raised an eyebrow, a question in her gaze. Martha nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. And I saw a vehicle, a motor car, parked down the lane near the old Miller cottage yesterday evening. A fancy one, not from around here. She paused, allowing the implication to settle. The cottage Sarah Miller, the artist, rents. Seems an odd place for a stranger to be lingering, especially at dusk. A ripple of quiet speculation passed through the small group of women. The Miller cottage was on the very edge of their community lands, a place rarely frequented by their own, and certainly not by English folk after sundown. That English woman, another quilter, Rebecca Hostetler, chimed in, her voice barely a whisper. She keeps to herself mostly, but I've heard talk of her strange paintings, all bright colours and ungodly figures. Rebecca clucked her tongue disapprovingly. Martha, however, wasn't interested in the artist's work. Her focus was sharper, more directed. Elias was coming from that direction, not long after I saw the motor car. She didn't accuse, didn't elaborate, simply presented the facts as she perceived them, letting the others connect the dots. The hum of the sewing machine seemed to grow louder, filling the silence that followed. The seeds of suspicion, once planted by Elias's subtle behavioral shifts, were now being watered by Martha's careful observations, growing into a low, pervasive hum within the tightly knit fabric of the community. Elias's world, once so secure in its hidden corners, was beginning to fray at the edges, tugged by the innocent curiosity of a child and the discerning eye of an elder. Under the bishop's eye, a jolt of sound, the familiar trill of his phone, pierced the barn's quiet, buried under a mound of sawdust. Elias froze, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. A wild bird trapped in a cage. The rhythmic clang of the blacksmith's hammer from down the lane was a deceptive balm, the only sound apart from his own pulse in the empty space. His fingers, suddenly clumsy, fumbled for the device. Elias. Sarah's voice, usually a soft melody, was a reedy, urgent cry, laced with an unfamiliar tremor. Are you there? I've been calling. I'm here, he managed, pressing the phone harder to his ear, his voice barely a whisper. What is it? You need to be more careful, she blurted, a frantic edge honing her tone. Someone saw you. Martha. She was talking to the others at the store. About your buggy. About my cottage. A sharp intake of breath hissed through the line. They know you were here, Elias. Or at least, they suspect. A cold knot tightened in his gut. He envisioned Martha's sharp gaze, her lips pursed in judgment. The earlier clandestine exchange with Anna and Leah, the hurried concealment of the drawing, flashed through his mind. He'd been reckless, undisciplined. What did she say? He rasped, his throat suddenly parched. Just whispers, questions, about the Englishwoman and her strange art. And then, you, near my place, after the motor car. Her voice dropped to a near inaudible murmur. I saw her looking at me, Elias, from the road. She knows. A prickle of sweat beaded on his forehead. The barn's air, usually a source of comfort, now pressed in, stifling and heavy with a fear that mirrored his own. I will be, he promised, the words feeling brittle and hollow. He wasn't sure he possessed the capacity for such caution. He ended the call, the abrupt silence amplifying the frantic thrum of his pulse. Sliding the phone back into its hiding place, the sawdust felt less like a shield and more like a burial shroud. Later that evening, the Fisher home was thick with the comforting aroma of stewed apples, yet permeated by an unspoken tension. Elias sat at the long wooden table, his gaze fixed on his plate. acutely conscious of his father's imposing presence at the head. Bishop Fisher, a man whose quiet wisdom commanded profound reverence, cleared his throat. The sound, though not loud, resonated through the room, silencing the soft clatter of cutlery. "Elias," his father began, his voice a low rumble, devoid of accusation, yet brimming with a quiet expectation. "You have been preoccupied of late." Elias's head snapped up, his eyes meeting his father's unwavering, discerning gaze. He felt a flush creep up his neck. I have been busy, Dad," he stammered, the lie tasting like ash. "With the repairs at the Miller place, there is much work." His father nodded slowly, a faint frown creasing his brow. "Indeed. But I have not seen you at the evening prayers as often. And your mind seems to wander, even when you are present. Is something troubling you, son?" The question was a gentle probe, a father's concern. Yet to Elias, it felt like an inquisition. He knew his father could see through his thinly veiled excuses. The bishop's eyes, usually warm, held a flicker of something Elias couldn't quite decipher. Disappointment, perhaps, or a deep-seated worry. "No, Dad. Nothing is troubling me," Elias insisted, forcing a smile that felt brittle. "Just tired from the work." Bishop Fisher held his gaze for a moment longer, a silence stretching between them, pregnant with unspoken observations. Then, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of generations, he turned his attention back to his meal. The moment passed, but the tension lingered, a taut string vibrating in the air. Elias pushed his food around his plate, his appetite gone. His father's words, Sarah's fear, Martha's knowing glances. It was all closing in. He felt like an animal caught in a tightening snare. He longed to retract, to disappear. Yet the pull towards Sarah was a relentless current, dragging him further out into dangerous waters. He had to see her, to reassure her, to reassure himself. But how? Every move felt scrutinized, every shadow a potential witness. The familiar walls of his world, once so comforting and predictable, now felt like a cage, its bars inexorably closing. The thought of his father's disappointment, a silent, profound sorrow, was a heavier burden than any physical punishment. He couldn't bear to hurt him, yet he couldn't seem to stop himself from walking this perilous path. Converging shadows. The clatter of the lug wrench against the gravel sent a flock of sparrows scattering from the nearby thicket, their chirps a sudden punctuation mark in the otherwise still afternoon. Elias wiped grease from his hands onto a rag, his gaze sweeping the quiet country road before settling on Sarah. Her car, now sporting its spare, sat like a red beacon against the muted greens and browns of the landscape. They were further down the lane than their usual meeting spot. A small, almost imperceptible deviation, but enough to place her vehicle in a more visible position from the main road. Just then, a turquoise Subaru, driven by Mrs. Gable, a recent transplant from the city, slowed as it passed. Mrs. Gable, with her perpetually surprised expression and a penchant for neighborhood surveillance, cast a long, curious look at Sarah's car, then at the two figures standing beside it. She offered a hesitant wave, which Elias did not return, his jaw tightening. Mrs. Gable's gaze lingered for a moment longer before she sped up, disappearing over the crest of the hill. A minute later, she was pulling into the driveway of her new friend, Rachel Miller, an old-order Mennonite who lived just a short buggy ride from the Fisher farm. "You know, I just saw the oddest thing," Mrs. Gable began, her voice a conspiratorial whisper as Rachel poured her iced tea. "That artist woman, the one who moved into the old Miller place, her car was pulled over on Miller's Lane, and, well, an Amish man was with her. Helping her with a tire, it looked like. Just seemed a bit unusual, didn't it?" Rachel, ever polite, nodded slowly, her mind already connecting Mrs. Gable's casual observation with Martha Stoltzfus's recent pointed questions about Elias's whereabouts. The next evening, As Elias helped his father mend a fence, he overheard two men from the community discussing a peculiar sighting. Heard tell that English woman's car was seen down Miller's Lane yesterday, one said, his voice low. Near where the creek bends. Heard she was with one of our boys. The words were a shard of ice in Elias's chest. He looked up, catching his father's distant, troubled gaze. The elder Bishop Fisher said nothing, but the furrow in his brow deepened. Later that week, Martha Stoltzfus cornered Elias's mother at the market. A neighbor mentioned seeing Sarah Jenkins's car on Miller's Lane recently, Martha said, her eyes alight with a knowing glint. And she wasn't alone. Just like I said, there's something about that woman and her art that draws people in, even those who shouldn't be drawn. The seeds of suspicion Martha had planted were now sprouting, watered by the English neighbor's chance sighting. Elias met Sarah by the stream a few days later, the air between them thick with unspoken tension. The rustling leaves no longer offered a comforting cover, but seemed to whisper their secret. They saw your car, Sarah, Elias said, his voice raw with frustration. Mrs. Gable. She told Rachel Miller. And now everyone's talking. Sarah flinched, her usual carefree demeanor replaced by a strained defensiveness. It was a flat tire, Elias. What was I supposed to do? Leave it there and walk all the way home? You should have called someone else, he countered, his voice rising. Someone English, anyone but me. We've been careful, so careful, and now this. Your car, just sitting there, right where anyone could see it. And what about you, Elias? She shot back, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and anger. They saw you too. You could have just driven past, pretended you didn't know me, and leave you stranded. That's not who I am, Sarah. But this is getting dangerous. Martha is already watching me. My father, he's looking at me differently. It's not just gossip. It's a net closing in. He gestured wildly, his hand sweeping across the dappled sunlight filtering through the trees. You don't understand what this means for me. For us. They don't just talk in my community. They judge. They condemn. Sarah's eyes welled with tears, but her jaw was set. So what are you saying, Elias? That we stop? That this whole, whatever this is, was just a mistake? Her voice cracked on the last word. Elias ran a hand through his hair, a desperate sound escaping his lips. I don't know. I don't know how much longer we can keep this up. Every time we meet, every little thing, it feels like another risk. Another thread pulled loose. I can't lose everything, Sarah. Not for this. He looked away, unable to meet her gaze, the weight of his community's expectations a crushing burden on his shoulders. The silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with the unspoken fears that now shadowed their forbidden connection. Brother's keeper. The rhythmic thwack of hammer on wood, usually a soothing cadence in Elias's predictable days, now grated on his nerves. Even the comforting scent of sawdust, mingling with the earthy dampness from morning rain, felt oppressive. He was fitting new siding onto Brother, Layman's barn, his mind a snarl of Sarah's anxious face and the icy glares that had shadowed him since the tire incident. Amos Miller, a man whose perception rarely faltered, paused nearby, feigning admiration for Elias's work. Heard Mrs. Gable had herself quite the story for Rachel Miller yesterday, Amos drawled, his gaze fixed on a distant field, but his implication sharp as flint. Something about a stranded Englishwoman on Maple Road, and a good Samaritan. Elias's grip tightened on the hammer. He forced a neutral expression. It was just a flat tire, Amos. Anyone would help. I, perhaps, Amos conceded, his tone steeped in skepticism. But a man of God must be careful, Elias. The devil finds purchase in idle hands and in unguarded hearts. He departed, leaving a bitter tang in Elias's mouth. Later that afternoon, Bishop Fisher joined him, his quiet authority a palpable weight that knotted Elias's stomach. His father watched him plane a beam, the scrape of steel on wood, loud in the sudden quiet. "Your mind seems elsewhere, son," he observed, his voice calm, yet layered with an unspoken query. "Troubles at the mill, perhaps? Or is there something else weighing on your spirit?" Elias kept his eyes on the wood, the fine curls peeling away under his hand. "Just tired, Dad. There's much to do." He could feel his father's unwavering scrutiny, a silent probe into his carefully constructed deception. He knew his father sensed the subtle shift, the tremor beneath his composed exterior. The pressure bore down, a vice tightening with each passing hour. Across the farm, Mary watched her brother with mounting disquiet. Elias, once a steadfast and predictable presence, now moved with a furtive quality, a shadow clouding his usually clear eyes. He picked at his food, spoke little, and often stared into the middle distance, hands still, brow furrowed. She'd noticed him return from errands, his customary route abandoned, a strange buoyancy in his step that evaporated when he caught her watching. He'd even begun tucking his treasured Ausbund hymnal, a gift from their mother, under his mattress instead of on his bedside table. It was a small detail, but Mary, who tidied their shared room daily, registered it, a place she never disturbed, a private space she respected. One particularly anxious evening, after Elias had left for a carpentry meeting at Bro. Yoda's, Mary's worries became unbearable, a cold dread settling in her stomach. She approached Elias's bed, her heart thrumming against her ribs. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the mattress's edge. It felt wrong, a trespass. But her gnawing fear for him outweighed her sense of propriety. With a deep breath, she lifted the mattress. The hymnal lay there, its leather cover worn smooth. Beneath it, tucked into a folded kerchief, she found it. A small, neatly folded piece of paper, distinctly finer and smoother than their family's coarse, unbleached linen correspondence, almost translucent. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded it. The handwriting was not their mother's elegant script, nor their father's firm hand. It was flowing, artistic, adorned with loops and flourishes. The words, though brief, were like a knife twisting in her gut. "Elias, I saw you today. My heart aches for your trouble. Meet me at the old oak, tomorrow at dusk. I need to know you are all right. S." Mary's breath hitched. S. Sarah. The Englishwoman. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Elias's late returns, the distant look in his eyes, the whispers she'd overheard at the market. Her brother, her steadfast Elias, was entangled in something forbidden, something that could shatter their family, their community. She refolded the note, her hands shaking, and tucked it back beneath the hymnal. A wave of nausea washed over her, her deep love for Elias, her fierce loyalty to her family, and the terrifying knowledge of what this meant for them all, crashed down upon her. The choice, she knew, would tear her apart. The unveiling. The scent of freshly sawn lumber and baked goods hung heavy in the air, mingling with the low murmur of conversations. It was a barn-raising, a symphony of communal effort, and a cornerstone of their shared existence. Yet, beneath the rhythmic thud of hammers and the shared laughter, an unsettling undercurrent pulsed through the gathering. Eyes, usually open and trusting, now darted with a covert curiosity towards Elias. He felt their collective gaze, a physical weight on his shoulders, each glance a pinprick of accusation. Martha Stoltzfus, her face a mask of pinched disapproval, stood near the refreshment tables, her hushed whispers carrying further than intended, weaving a narrative of suspicion around him. Even Bishop Fisher, usually a beacon of calm authority, watched Elias with an unnervingly quiet intensity that spoke volumes. Elias tried to lose himself in the work, heaving beams and nailing planks, but the rhythm felt off, his movements stiff, his mind a whirlwind of Sarah's smile and the imminent threat of discovery. Mary, usually steadfast in her duties, moved through the crowd like a phantom, her basket of biscuits untouched. The hidden note, crumpled and tucked deep within her apron pocket, felt like a burning coal against her skin. Each kind word from a neighbor, each shared smile, felt like a betrayal. She caught her mother's eye across the bustling yard, a tired, kind gaze that usually offered comfort, but today only intensified Mary's internal tremor. Her mother was helping tend to the children, her face flushed from the warmth of the sun and the effort of chasing a particularly boisterous toddler. Mary found her by the hand pump, drawing water into a wooden bucket. "Ma'am," Mary whispered, her voice barely audible above the gentle sloshing. Her mother turned, a question in her eyes. "I must speak with you." Her mother, seeing the unusual distress etched on Mary's face, led her away from the general din, towards the quiet shade of the old oak tree at the edge of the property. The air here was cooler, more still. Mary's hands trembled as she pulled the folded paper from her pocket. "I found this," she choked out, holding it forth. "In Elias's room." Her mother took the note, her brow furrowing as she unfolded the small square of paper. Her eyes scanned Sarah's elegant script, her lips moving silently as she read. The color drained from her face, leaving it pale and drawn. A soft gasp escaped her, a sound of profound devastation. The paper fluttered from her grasp, drifting to the grass like a fallen leaf. "Elias," she whispered, her voice laced with a pain that pierced Mary's heart. "He, with an Englishwoman." The word Englishwoman hung in the air, heavy with the weight of generations of separation and unwavering tradition. Tears welled in her mother's eyes, tracing clean paths down her dusty cheeks. She pressed a hand to her mouth, stifling a sob. The revelation was not just about Elias, but about the fragile fabric of their family, their community, tearing at the seams. At that moment, as if drawn by an invisible thread, Sarah appeared at the edge of the lane, her small car parked discreetly behind a copse of trees. She had promised Elias she would come, just to catch a glimpse, to feel a connection, however fleeting. Her vibrant dress, a splash of color against the muted landscape, was a stark contrast to the plain attire of the Amish women. She stood there, a vision of her world intersecting with his, her gaze fixed on the hive of activity that was the barn raising, searching for Elias. Elias, lifting a final heavy timber into place, paused to wipe sweat from his brow. His eyes, almost instinctively, found Sarah. Their gazes locked across the distance, a silent acknowledgement of their shared secret, their forbidden bond. But then he saw his mother, her face ravaged by grief, pointing a trembling finger, not at him, but towards Sarah. Her voice, usually soft and gentle, now carried a raw, guttural cry that cut through the joyful noise of the gathering. "Elias, what have you done?" The barn raising ground to a halt. Hammers fell silent. Conversations ceased. All eyes turned, first to Elias's mother, then to Elias, and finally to Sarah, standing frozen at the lane's edge, a stark, undeniable symbol of the hidden truth. The community's murmur rose again, this time not with suspicion, but with the crushing certainty of exposure. Bishop Fisher's stern gaze settled on Elias, heavy with sorrow and judgment. The secret, a fragile thing carefully guarded, had been unveiled, shattering the illusion of normalcy and leaving Elias exposed in the harsh light of their collective knowing, the cost of love. A pall of silent condemnation cloaked the meeting house, pressing down on Elias with an ancient, suffocating weight. Every eye, from the youngest child to the most weathered elder, impaled him. Their collective gaze felt like a physical cauterization on his skin. Bishop Fisher, a stoic mask of sorrow, stood before the assembly, hands clasped. His voice a low thrum that nevertheless reverberated through the hushed room. "Elias Fisher," the bishop intoned, his words a knell of finality, You have veered from the path of righteousness, from the hallowed covenant of our forebears. You have fraternized with the English, desecrated our cherished traditions, and brought dishonor upon your lineage and this community. Each syllable hammered another nail into Elias's coffin of belonging. By the authority vested in me by God and this church, we declare you to be in Maidung. From this day forward, you are severed. No one shall break bread with you. No one shall conduct commerce with you. No one shall offer you solace until you repent and seek absolution. The pronouncement was punctuated by his mother's sudden, sharp gasp. Elias dared not meet her eye, nor Mary's, whose silent weeping he could almost feel beside her. He pictured his mother's face, etched with a grief more profound than death, and the thought twisted in him like a fresh blade. He was a phantom among the living, present yet utterly erased. The communal quiet that ensued was more deafening than any shout, a chasm where his entire world had once thrived. As the assembly dispersed, the congregation filed out, faces downturned, steps quickened, leaving Elias isolated in the echoing chamber, the frigid touch of ostracism already permeating his bones. Miles away, Sarah shivered with a different kind of chill. The flat tire, though remedied with Elias's unexpected assistance, had left more than just rubber on the road. The next morning, at the local hardware store, Mrs. Miller, typically effusive, offered only a clipped nod, her gaze skittering away when Sarah tried to hold it. Mr. Henderson at the feed store, usually garrulous about his prize-winning pumpkins, simply stated the price before turning his back to meticulously arrange sacks of grain. Whispers, like dry leaves scuttling across pavement, trailed her. At the diner, her customary coffee arrived without the usual friendly banter, the waitress's smile replaced by a tight, strained expression. Sarah tried to dismiss it, to tell herself it was her imagination, but the shift was undeniable, palpable. When fragments of a conversation drifted to her at the gas station, that Amish man, a disgrace. Comprehension finally dawned. The small, close-knit English community, generally so welcoming to the new artist, had closed ranks. The rural quiet she had sought now felt heavy, swollen with unspoken judgment. She had never considered that her connection to Elias might ripple beyond their private encounters, impacting her own standing in this nascent life. She had been an outsider before, but now she was an outcast, indelibly marked by an association whose gravity she had not fully grasped. Back at the Fisher farm, the supper table was a stark tableau of profound sorrow. His father sat rigid, eyes fixed on his plate, steadfastly refusing to acknowledge Elias's presence, as if a glance would solidify the painful reality. His younger siblings, bewildered and fearful, ate in an unnatural silence, their usual childish chatter replaced by the delicate clinking of cutlery, like tiny chimes of grief. His mother, however, could not contain her anguish. Her shoulders trembled with suppressed sobs, and once she lifted her tear-reddened eyes to Elias, her gaze a searing compound of love and betrayal. "How could you, Elias?" she choked out, her voice raspy with emotion. "We raised you in the light, in faith. How could you bring this darkness upon us?" Her words, though not shouted, resonated with an unbearable pain, a deeper cut than the bishop's decree. Mary, seated beside her, reached out a hand to their mother, her own face streaked with tears, a silent testament to the fracturing of their family. Elias felt a crushing weight in his chest, a realization that the cost of his love was not just his own ostracization, but the rending of his family's very fabric, the anguish etched on the faces of those he held dearest. The silence that followed his mother's accusation was thick with unexpressed grief and the irreversible consequences of his choices, a fork in the road. The crisp autumn air, usually a balm, now felt like a shroud around Elias as he stood with Sarah beneath the skeletal branches of an oak. The silence between them, once comfortable, now throbbed with unspoken burdens. He watched her trace patterns in the frost-nipped grass with the toe of her boot. Her usually vibrant spirit dimmed, mirroring his own. It feels final, Sarah murmured, her voice barely a whisper against the gentle rustle of dry leaves. She didn't look at him, her gaze fixed on the earth. Elias swallowed, his throat tight. It is. The word felt like a stone dropping into a deep well. My father. The Meidung. He didn't need to elaborate. The ostracism was absolute. A chasm separating him from everything he'd ever known. There's no turning back from that. Not easily. She finally met his eyes. A flicker of profound sorrow there. So, this is it then? Her voice cracked. A choice between us and everything you've always been. He exhaled slowly, the cold air stinging his lungs. It's more than that, Sarah. It's my whole world. My family. My soul. He reached out, his hand hovering, then gently cupped her cheek. Her skin was cool beneath his touch. And you. You are my world too. Now. The admission was raw, heavy with a love he knew could destroy him. But to fully choose you, it means leaving it all behind. Becoming English. Cutting every tie. A tear tracked a path down her cheek, and he thumbed it away. And if you don't choose me, she asked, her voice trembling. Then I repent, he said, the word tasting like ash. I beg forgiveness. I go through a long, hard road to be accepted back. And I never see you again, never speak your name, never think of you in anything but regret. The thought was a searing pain, an impossible amputation. Her gaze searched his, desperate and pleading. Can you do that, Elias? Can you truly live without this? She gestured vaguely between them, to the fragile, beautiful connection they had forged against all odds. He closed his eyes for a moment, picturing the quiet warmth of her hand in his, the scent of her paints, the way her laughter echoed through the woods. He pictured his mother's tear-stained face, his father's rigid disappointment. The weight of both futures pressed down on him, suffocating. I don't know, he confessed, his voice hoarse. I honestly don't know. The sun dipped lower, casting long, bruised shadows across the fields as Elias walked towards his family's farm. The familiar silhouette of the barn, usually a comforting sight, now loomed like a fortress he was barred from. He found his father, Bishop Fisher, in the carpentry workshop, the scent of sawdust and fresh-cut pine thick in the air. His father was meticulously sanding a wooden cradle, his movements precise and unhurried. The rhythmic rasp of sandpaper against wood was the only sound. Elias stood in the doorway, the cold air from outside trailing in. His father didn't look up immediately, his face a stoic mask. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken accusations and profound grief. Father, Elias finally said, his voice feeling alien in the quiet space. Bishop Fisher's hand paused, then resumed its steady motion. Elias. His voice was flat, devoid of the usual warmth. It was the voice of the bishop, not his father. I've come to speak to you, Elias continued, his hands clenching at his sides. His father finally set the cradle down, turning slowly. His eyes, usually kind, were now shadowed with sorrow and a deep-seated disappointment that pierced Elias to the core. There is little left to speak of, son. The community has spoken. God's will has been made clear. But my heart, Father, Elias pleaded, stepping further into the workshop. My heart is torn. This life, the one with Sarah, it has opened something in me I never knew existed. I never meant to dishonor you, or Mother, or our way. Bishop Fisher's jaw tightened. The path of repentance is open. It is a hard road, a long road, one of humility and true sorrow for your transgressions. You would sever all ties with this English woman. You would forsake her memory, her influence. You would rededicate yourself wholly to the Ordnung, to God. He paused, his gaze unwavering. Or you walk away. Forever. The air crackled with the weight of the ultimatum. Elias felt the familiar ache in his chest, the internal tearing. He saw the years of quiet devotion, the simple joys of community, the enduring love of his family. He saw the path of peace, of belonging, if he only chose to submit. And then he saw Sarah's eyes, filled with a love that mirrored his own, a future bright with possibilities he had never dared to dream of. "Father," Elias began, his voice barely a whisper, thick with unshed tears. He swallowed, the words catching. He looked around the workshop, at the tools he'd known since childhood, at the scent of the wood that was the very essence of his heritage. He looked at his father, the man who had taught him everything, the man whose heart he was breaking. Then he thought of Sarah, alone, her courage, her spirit, her unwavering belief in a love that transcended boundaries. He thought of the emptiness that would consume him if he let her go, truly, irrevocably. "I cannot," he finally choked out, the words tasting like both freedom and utter desolation. "I cannot forsake her. I cannot live a lie, Father. Not anymore." Bishop Fisher closed his eyes, a single tear escaping the corner and tracing a path down his weathered cheek. "Then you have chosen," he said, his voice thick with a grief that mirrored Elias's own. "May God have mercy on your soul, Elias." Elias turned, his heart a raw, bleeding wound, and walked out of the workshop, out of the farm, and out of the life he had known, forever. The setting sun cast his long shadow before him, a solitary figure moving towards an unknown future. He didn't look back.